The man who pretended to be a doctor and almost destroyed my life. I thought I was dating a hero, a man who saved lives, who wore his exhaustion like a badge of honor, who smelled like hospital antiseptic and sacrifice. For 3 years, I defended his absences, forgave his excuses, and ignored every red flag waving in my face, until one phone call shattered everything. The doctor I loved? He'd never stepped foot in an operating room. He'd never saved a single life, but he'd destroyed plenty, including mine. And when I finally discovered the truth, I realized I wasn't his girlfriend. I was just another mark in his carefully calculated gulpy. I met him on a Tuesday afternoon at a coffee shop in downtown Portland. He was sitting alone, reading some medical journal with pages filled with terms I couldn't even pronounce. When our eyes met, he smiled. Not one of those creepy smiles you get from random guys, but something genuine, warm. I'd just spilled half my latte on the counter, and he handed me a napkin without making me feel like an idiot. "Rough day?" he asked. I laughed it off, said something about Mondays lasting all week, and that's when he told me he understood completely. He'd just finished a 36-hour shift at Providence Hospital. A doctor. Of course he was. He looked exhausted, but in that noble, heroic kind of way. Like someone who'd been saving lives while the rest of us complained about our Wi-Fi being slow. His name was Marcus, Dr. Marcus Webb. He had this calm, reassuring presence that made you feel safe just standing next to him. We talked for maybe 20 minutes that day, but it felt like I'd known him forever. He asked about my work. I'm a graphic designer for a small marketing firm, and he actually seemed interested. Not that glazed-over look most guys give you when you talk about fonts and color theory. Marcus listened. He asked questions. He told me about his passion for emergency medicine, how he'd always wanted to help people ever. Since his younger sister had been in a car accident when they were kids, the doctors saved her life, and from that moment, he knew what he had to do with his. God, it was such a beautiful story. How could I not fall for that? We exchanged numbers, and he texted me that same night. Nothing pushy, just a simple, "Really enjoyed talking with you today. Hope we can do it again soon." Over the next few weeks, we went on actual dates. He'd show up still wearing his scrubs sometimes, apologizing for not having time to change between his shift and meeting me. I didn't mind. Actually, I found it endearing. Here was this dedicated professional making time for me despite his insane schedule. He took me to this little Italian place in the Pearl District, and over pasta and red wine, he told me about his day, a motorcycle accident victim he'd helped stabilize, the adrenaline of the ER, the weight of holding someone's life in your hands. I was mesmerized. This wasn't just some guy with a boring 9 to 5. This was someone who mattered, who made a real difference in the world. By our 5th date, I was hooked, completely and utterly hooked. Marcus had this way of making me feel like the most important person in the room, even when he was clearly exhausted. He'd ask about my projects, remember tiny details I'd mentioned weeks before, bring me my favorite caramel macchiato when he knew I'd had a stressful day at work. He was thoughtful in ways I didn't even know men could be. And yeah, he was handsome too. 6'2", dark hair starting to gray at the temples, these incredible green eyes that seemed to see right through you. But it wasn't just his looks. It was everything about him. The way he talked about his patients with such compassion. The way he'd get this distant look when he was worried about someone's prognosis. The way he'd apologize profusely when his pager went off during dinner. "I'm so sorry," he'd say, checking the number. "It's the hospital. There's an emergency." And I'd tell him to go, of course. How could I be upset? People needed him. Lives were literally on the line. So what if our date got cut short? So what if he had to cancel plans last minute? That's what you sign up for when you date a doctor, right? The irregular hours, the constant interruptions, the knowledge that you'll always come second to the job. I told myself I was okay with it. More than okay. I was proud. Proud to be with someone so dedicated, so selfless. My friends would joke about it. "Where's Dr. McDreamy tonight?" they'd ask when I showed up to girls' night alone again. "Saving lives," I'd say with a smile. And they'd roll their eyes good-naturedly. But I could tell they were a little jealous too. Who wouldn't want a boyfriend who was literally a hero? 3 months in, Marcus asked me to be his girlfriend officially. We were at this overlook point outside the city, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. He'd packed a picnic. Cheese, crackers, wine, chocolate-covered strawberries. He'd thought of everything. "I know I'm not always available," he said, taking my hand. I know my schedule is crazy, and I can't always be there when you need me, but I want you to know that when I am with you, you have all of me, every part. You make the hard days bearable. You make me remember why I love what I do, because helping people, caring for people, that's what matters. And I care about you more than I've cared about anyone in a very long time. How was I supposed to say anything but yes to that? The first year was a blur of stolen moments and late-night phone calls. Marcus would text me at 2 a.m. after a particularly rough shift, just to hear my voice. Sometimes he'd show up at my apartment at dawn, still in his scrubs, exhausted but needing to see me before he crashed for a few hours. We'd curl up on my couch, and I'd run my fingers through his hair, while he told me about the teenager whose life he'd saved, or the elderly woman who'd held his hand and thanked him for his kindness. These were the moments that made all the canceled dinners and missed birthdays worth it. This was real love, messy, complicated, but worth fighting for. I'd ask about meeting his colleagues, maybe coming by the hospital sometime, and he'd get this uncomfortable look. It's complicated, he'd say. Hospital policy is pretty strict about personal visits, and honestly, I like keeping my work life separate from my personal life. The ER is intense, and when I'm there, I need to focus. But I promise, one day I'll introduce you to everyone. That made sense to me. Boundaries were healthy, right? And it wasn't like I needed to parade around his workplace. I trusted him. That was enough. Around the 8-month mark, I noticed he never really talked about specific doctors or nurses by name. It was always my colleague, or one of the nurses, or the attending physician. When I'd ask for details, like where exactly in the hospital the ER was located, or what his typical rotation schedule looked like, he'd change the subject or give vague answers. Every day is different, he'd say. That's what I love about emergency medicine. You never know what's coming through those doors. I didn't push it. Why would I? He was clearly stressed enough without me interrogating him about work. But then there were these little things that started adding up, though I didn't see the pattern at the time. He never had. Hospital ID visible. Said he kept it in his locker. He never got calls on his cell phone from the hospital. Always said they paged him, and he'd check a separate pager that I never actually saw. He didn't have any student loan debt, which seemed weird for a doctor, but he said his parents had helped him through medical school. And who was I to question that? Some people are lucky, right? His car was nice, but not doctor nice. A decent Toyota, nothing fancy. But again, maybe he was just financially responsible. Maybe he was saving up for a house. Maybe he donated a lot to charity. There were a million reasonable explanations, and I chose to believe every single one of them because the alternative, that something was wrong, was unthinkable. The trahison, the betrayal, was happening right in front of me, and I was too blind to see it, too in love to question, too trusting to doubt. Marcus had woven this perfect lie, and I'd wrapped myself in it like a warm blanket, never realizing it was actually a trap. Year 2 brought new challenges. Marcus said he was being considered for a promotion, something about becoming an attending physician in the ER, which would mean more responsibility, but also more stable hours. I was thrilled. Maybe we could finally have something resembling a normal relationship. Maybe we could plan a vacation, or I could meet his family, or we could talk about moving in together. But the promotion kept getting delayed. Budget cuts. He'd explain. Hospital politics. They're restructuring the entire department. Always another excuse. Another reason why things couldn't move forward. I was patient, though. I'd waited this long. What was a few more months? He started asking to borrow money. Small amounts at first. My paycheck got delayed because of some administrative mix-up, he'd say. Can you spot me $300 until Friday? Of course I would. He was my boyfriend, and he'd paid for countless dinners and gifts over the past year. It seemed only fair. Then it was $500, then $800. I had an unexpected expense, he'd explain. My student loans increased. I had to help my mom with her medical bills. Each time he promised to pay me back, and sometimes he did, though never the full amount, and never when he said he would. I kept a running tally in my phone. After 6 months, he owed me close to $4,000. When I mentioned it gently, he got defensive. I'm literally saving lives every day, and you're worried about money? I thought you understood the kind of pressure I'm under. I felt terrible. He was right. I was being petty. Money wasn't important. Our relationship was. But here's the thing about golpes, about scams. They work because they're layered. It's never just one big obvious lie. It's 1,000 small, believable lies stacked on top of each other until you're so deep in you can't see your way out. And the person running the Gulpy, they're good at making you feel like you're the problem, like you're the one being unreasonable or suspicious or cruel. Marcus was a master at this. Every time I questioned something, he'd flip it around, make me feel guilty for doubting him. After everything we've been through, you don't trust me? He'd look hurt, wounded, and I'd immediately apologize. Promise I did trust him. Of course I did. How could I not? The holidays came and went. Marcus said he had to work both Thanksgiving and Christmas. Someone had to cover the shifts, and he'd volunteered because he knew other doctors had families. I spent Thanksgiving with my parents, and when they asked about Marcus, I made excuses. He's working, saving lives. My dad gave me this look, this concerned, skeptical look, but didn't say anything. Christmas was worse. I was alone in my apartment, watching trashy TV and eating leftover Chinese food, while Marcus was supposedly at the hospital dealing with holiday emergencies. He texted me periodically, thinking of you, and wish I could be there. But something felt off. It was Christmas. Even hospital staff got breaks, didn't they? But I pushed the thought away. Doctors were different. Medicine didn't take holidays. In January of year 3, things shifted. Marcus started being even harder to reach. Days would go by without a text. He'd cancel plans at the last minute with increasingly flimsy excuses. When we did see each other, he seemed distracted, distant. Is everything okay? I'd ask. Just stressed. He'd reply, we're understaffed, and I'm picking up extra shifts. I suggested he take some time off. Maybe we could go somewhere for a weekend. Just the two of us. He said he'd think about it, but it never happened. There was always another emergency, another crisis, another reason why he couldn't step away from the hospital. My best friend Sarah started voicing concerns. Have you actually verified that he works where he says he works? She asked over brunch one Sunday. I was offended. Of course he does. Why would he lie about that? She shrugged. I'm just saying, 3 years and you've never been to his workplace? Never met any of his colleagues? Don't you think that's weird? I defended him, told her she didn't understand the medical field, the demands, the boundaries, but her words stuck with me, burrowing into my brain like an invasive species. What if she was right? What if I'd been so desperate to believe in this relationship that I'd ignored every red flag waving right in front of my face? I started paying more attention, really paying attention. And once you start looking, really looking, the cracks become impossible to ignore. His medical knowledge seemed surface level. He could talk in general terms about procedures and conditions, but when I'd ask specific questions, prompted by my own Google searches, he'd get vague or change the subject. His scrubs never had the hospital logo on them. When I asked about that, he said he preferred to buy his own because the hospital-provided ones were uncomfortable, reasonable enough. But then I noticed the scrubs looked cheap, like costume scrubs, not the real thing. And his hands? Shouldn't a surgeon's hands have some kind of wear? Shouldn't there be calluses or something from all that hand washing and glove wearing? The turning point came on a random Wednesday afternoon in March. I was at work, buried in a project deadline, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? Is this speaking with Emma Rodriguez? A professional female voice asked. I confirmed. I'm calling from Providence Hospital regarding Dr. Marcus Webb. He listed you as his emergency contact, and we're trying to reach him about some important administrative matters. Do you know how we can get in touch with him? My heart stopped. Emergency contact? That was sweet, actually. But why couldn't they reach him? Have you tried calling him directly? I asked. There was a pause. Ma'am, we don't have a direct number for him on file. That's part of what we're trying to resolve. We need to update our records for all staff members, and Dr. Webb's file is incomplete. Something in her tone made my stomach drop. Can you tell me what department he works in? I asked, trying to sound casual. Another pause, longer this time. Ma'am, I'm looking at our staff directory right now, and I'm not seeing a Dr. Marcus Webb listed in any department. Are you sure he works at Providence? The world tilted. He's in the ER, I said, my voice coming out strangled. Emergency medicine. He's been there for years. More typing sounds on her end. I'm sorry, but we don't have any record of a Marcus Webb employed here, in the ER or elsewhere. Is it possible he works at a different Providence hospital? We have several locations. I managed to thank her and hung up. my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. There had to be an explanation. Maybe he worked at a different hospital. Maybe there was a computer error. Maybe he used a different name professionally. I called him immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted, "We need to talk. Now." Nothing. Hours passed. I left work early, drove to his apartment, a modest one-bedroom in Southeast Portland that I'd been to dozens of times. I knocked. No answer. I called again. Voicemail. I sat in my car outside his building for 2 hours, waiting. My mind was racing, cycling through possibilities. Maybe he was in surgery. Maybe his phone died. Maybe there was a mass casualty event and all hands were on deck. But that voice on the phone kept echoing. "We don't have any record of a Marcus Webb employed here." When he finally called back, it was almost 10 p.m. "Hey babe, sorry, crazy day. What's up?" His voice was casual, cheerful even. I cut right to it. "I got a call from Providence Hospital today. They were looking for you." Silence. Then, "Oh yeah? What did they want?" His tone had shifted, guarded now. "They wanted to update your file. But Marcus? They said they don't have you in their system. They said there's no Dr. Marcus Webb working there." More silence. When he spoke again, his voice was tight. "That's ridiculous. Of course I work there. It's probably just a clerical error. You know how disorganized hospital admin can be." But he didn't sound convincing. He sounded like someone who'd been caught, who was scrambling for a story. "Then let's go there together," I said. "Tomorrow, let's go to the hospital and clear this up." He started making excuses immediately. "I can't tomorrow. I have back-to-back surgeries. And honestly, Emma, I'm a little hurt that you'd believe some random admin person over me. After 3 years, you don't trust me?" There it was again. The manipulation, the guilt trip, the deflection. But this time it didn't work. This time I saw right through it. "If you have nothing to hide, just meet me at the hospital tomorrow at noon. We'll walk in together. You'll show me your office, introduce me to your colleagues. That's all. Just prove to me that I'm being paranoid." He got angry then. Really angry. Started yelling about how I was being crazy, how I was letting one phone call destroy 3 years of relationship, how I clearly never trusted him if I was acting like this. "You know what?" he finally said. "Maybe we need to take a break. Maybe you need to figure out what you really want, because this relationship clearly isn't working for you." And then he hung up. Just like that. After 3 years, he hung up on me because I asked him to prove he was who he said he was. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment of our relationship, every excuse, every cancellation, every borrowed dollar, every vague answer. The pattern was so clear now, I couldn't believe I'd missed it. Or maybe I hadn't missed it. Maybe I'd just chosen not to see it because seeing it meant admitting I'd been played, that the man I loved, the man I'd spent 3 years of my life with, was a lie, that I'd been the victim of a golpe so elaborate, so complete, that I'd willingly handed over my trust, my money, my heart to someone who'd never deserved any of it. The next morning, I did what I should have done months ago. I drove to Providence Hospital, walked right up to the main desk. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Dr. Marcus Webb. He works in the emergency department." The receptionist, a kind-looking older woman, typed into her computer, shook her head. "I'm not seeing anyone by that name. Let me check our staff directory." More typing, more head shaking. "No, I'm sorry. We don't have a Dr. Webb on staff. Are you sure you have the right hospital?" I showed her a picture of Marcus on my phone. "Have you ever seen this man here?" She studied it, then called over a colleague. They both looked, both shook their heads. "Sorry, dear. Never seen him." I felt like I was going to throw up. I drove to the other Providence Hospital across town. Same result. Then I tried the University Hospital, Oregon Health and Science, even Legacy Emmanuel. Nothing. No one knew him. No one had ever seen him. Dr. Marcus Webb didn't exist. The man I'd loved for 3 years was a ghost, a phantom, a lie wrapped in a white coat. I sat in my car in a hospital parking lot and cried until I couldn't cry anymore. Then I got angry. Really, truly angry. This man, whoever he was, had stolen 3 years of my life, had stolen my money, my trust, my ability to believe in people, and he'd done it so smoothly, so effortlessly, that I'd never even questioned it until it was almost too late. When I got home, I did what anyone would do in 2024. I went full internet detective. I searched for Marcus Webb. cross-referencing with medical licenses in Oregon, Washington, California. Nothing. Then I searched for his face using reverse image search, and that's when things got really scary. His picture came up. On a forum, a website dedicated to exposing romance scammers and con artists. There were dozens of posts about him, but he wasn't using the name Marcus Webb. He was James Patterson, David Reynolds, Christopher Hayes, a different name for every woman he'd scammed. The stories were all eerily similar to mine. Fake doctor, emergency room, always busy, borrowed money, disappeared when questioned. One woman said she'd given him $30,000 over 2 years. Another said he'd proposed to her, taken out credit cards in her name, and vanished. A third said she'd only discovered the truth after he'd convinced her to invest in a fake medical clinic he was supposedly opening. I felt sick, physically, violently sick. This wasn't just a guy who'd lied about his job. This was a professional con artist, a predator who targeted women, built relationships with them, exploited their trust and emotions, and then moved on to the next victim. And I'd fallen for it completely. I'd been so easy, so eager to believe in the fantasy of the perfect boyfriend, the heroic doctor, that I'd ignored every warning sign. The venganza, the revenge I felt building inside me wasn't hot and impulsive. It was cold, calculated, and absolutely necessary. This man couldn't be allowed to do this to anyone else. I started documenting everything. Every text message, every email, every Venmo transaction. I made a timeline of our entire relationship, noting every red flag, every lie, every manipulation. Then, I filed a police report. The officer who took my statement looked sympathetic but not surprised. "Unfortunately, we see this a lot," he said. "These romance scams are becoming more sophisticated. The guy you're describing sounds like someone we've had reports about before. Let me make some calls." Turns out, Marcus Webb, whose real name was actually Daniel Morrison, was wanted in 3 states for fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. He'd been running this same scam for at least 7 years, targeting professional women in their 30s and 40s, always playing the role of the noble, overworked doctor. The detective assigned to my case, a no-nonsense woman named Detective Chen, told me I was actually lucky. "Most victims don't figure it out until they're completely financially ruined," she said. "You stopped at $4,000. We have victims who lost their entire savings, their retirement accounts, even their homes. This guy is good at what he does. He's a professional manipulator." She explained that Daniel Morrison had a whole operation: fake credentials, costume scrubs bought online, even business cards and a realistic-looking pager that never actually received calls. He'd study medical terminology and procedures just enough to sound credible. He'd target women on dating apps, in coffee shops, at bookstores. He'd build the relationship slowly, establish trust, then start asking for money. Small amounts at first, then escalating. And when someone got too close to discovering the truth, he'd disappear, change his name, move to a new city, and start all over again. "We've been trying to track him for 18 months, Detective Chen said. "But he's slippery. He uses fake IDs, pays cash for everything, never stays in one place too long. Your documentation, though, this could really help us. You've given us concrete evidence, transaction records, photographs. This might be what we need to finally catch him." She asked if I'd be willing to testify if they arrested him, and I said absolutely. I wanted to look him in the eyes in a courtroom and make sure he knew exactly what he'd done, exactly how many lives he'd destroyed with his lies. But I didn't want to stop there. Reporting him to the police was necessary, but it wasn't enough. How many women were out there right now, maybe going on their first date with Dr. Marcus Webb, or whatever name he was using this week? How many were falling for the same lies I'd fallen? 4? I joined that online forum I'd found, created a detailed post with all the information I had: his picture, his aliases, his methods, his patterns. Within 24 hours, 3 more women reached out to me privately. They'd been dating him too, some currently, some in the past. We compared notes, and the pattern was identical. Same lines, same excuses, same manipulation tactics. It was like he was reading from a script, and we'd all been too love-drunk to realize we were just characters in his play. Together, we created a more comprehensive document. We contacted local news stations, and one journalist, a woman who'd done stories on financial fraud before, was interested. She interviewed all of us, verified our stories, and ran a segment on the evening news titled, "The Doctor Who Never Was. Local Women Warn Others About Sophisticated Romance Scam." My face was blurred, my voice altered, but my story was there, and so were the stories of the other victims. We wanted people to see how easy it is to fall for these schemes, how these con artists prey on fundamental human desires, to be loved, to be special, to find someone who values you. The segment aired on a Thursday night. By Friday morning, my phone was blowing up. Messages from friends who'd seen it, even though they didn't know it was me. Messages from strangers who'd been scammed in similar ways. Messages from women who dated Daniel Morrison under other names in other cities. The scope of his operation was staggering. We're talking dozens of victims, maybe more, across multiple states, and he'd gotten away with it for years because victims were too embarrassed to come forward, too ashamed to admit they'd been fooled. That shame is part of how these gulpies work. The con artist banks on you being too humiliated to report them, too worried about looking stupid to tell anyone what happened. But I refused to be ashamed. I'd been lied to by a professional liar. That wasn't my fault. That was his crime, his choice, his moral failing. I'd done what any reasonable person would do. I'd trusted someone who seemed trustworthy. I'd loved someone who seemed worthy of love. The trahison, the betrayal, wasn't on me. It was on him, entirely and completely. And I was going to make sure everyone knew it. 3 weeks after the news segment aired, Detective Chen called me. "We got him," she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. He was in Seattle, running the same scam on a nurse, ironically. Enough. She saw the news story online, recognized him, and called us immediately. We picked him up this morning. I felt this rush of emotions. Relief, vindication, anger, sadness. It was over. He was in custody. He couldn't hurt anyone else. But it didn't erase the past 3 years. It didn't give me back the time I'd wasted, the money I'd lost, the trust I'd given so freely to someone who'd never deserved it. The legal process took months. Daniel Morrison was charged with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and theft by deception across 3 states. I testified at his trial, along with 6 other women, sitting in that courtroom, listening to his lawyer try to paint him as someone who'd just made some bad choices, who'd been struggling financially and made mistakes. It was infuriating. These weren't mistakes. Mistakes are accidental. This was deliberate, calculated, predatory behavior. He'd looked each of us in the eyes, told us he loved us, and stolen from us without a shred of remorse. When it was my turn on the stand, I told my story clearly and calmly. I explained how we'd met, how the relationship had developed, how long it had taken me to realize something was wrong. The prosecutor asked me, "Why didn't you question it sooner?" And I said, "Because when you love someone, you want to believe them. You want to believe that the person you've chosen to give your heart to is worthy of that gift. And people like the defendant, they exploit that. They weaponize your capacity for love and trust and turn it against you." I looked right at Daniel Morrison when I said it. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was convicted on 14 counts and sentenced to 8 years in prison. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough to compensate for the damage he'd done. But it was something. More importantly, his conviction was public record. His face was in databases. When women Googled his picture or his known aliases now, they'd find the truth. That was the real venganza, the real revenge. Not just punishing him, but making sure his ability to victimize others was severely limited going forward. After the trial, I had to figure out how to move forward with my life. 3 years is a long time to spend with someone, even if that someone was a complete fabrication. I'd built my routine around his schedule, made decisions based on our supposed future together. Now I had to rebuild everything from scratch. I started therapy, which helped. My therapist helped me see that being deceived doesn't make you weak or stupid. It makes you human. She helped me understand that con artists are successful because they're professionals at manipulation, and beating yourself up for falling for a professional is like being angry at yourself for not being able to spot a master illusionist's tricks. I also became more involved in victim advocacy. I started speaking at workshops about financial fraud and romance scams, sharing my story in the hopes that it might help someone else recognize the warning signs earlier than I did. It was empowering, turning my worst experience into something potentially helpful for others. Every time someone came up to me after a presentation and said, "I think I might be dating someone like this," or "This happened to my sister," I felt like maybe, just maybe, some good could come from what I'd been through. Dating again was terrifying. How do you trust someone when you'd been so thoroughly betrayed? How do you open your heart when the last person you opened it to had used that vulnerability to destroy you? It took 2 years before I was ready to even consider it. And when I did start dating again, I was different. More cautious? Yes, but also more aware. I asked questions. I verified information. I met people's friends and colleagues early on. I didn't ignore red flags or make excuses for inconsistencies. Some people might call that jaded. I call it wisdom earned through experience. The thing about golpes, about cons, about betrayals this deep, they change you. You can't go through something like that and come out the same person. The question is whether you let it make you bitter and closed off, or whether you let it make you stronger and more discerning. I chose the latter. I chose to believe that what happened to me was the exception, not the rule. That most people are genuine, even if some aren't. That love is still worth pursuing, even if it comes with risks. Looking back now, 4 years later, I can see the experience with some clarity. Daniel Morrison stole 3 years of my life and $4,000, yes. But he didn't steal my ability to love, my ability to trust, or my ability to hope. Those things I kept, even if they're now tempered with a healthy dose of skepticism. And in a weird way, going through that experience and coming out the other side made me realize how strong I actually am. I survived something that could have broken me completely. I didn't just survive. I fought back, helped bring a criminal to justice, and prevented him from hurting countless other women. That's not nothing. The women I met through this experience, my fellow survivors, became some of my closest friends. We have this bond that's hard to explain to people who haven't been through it. We check in on each other, celebrate each other's victories, support each other through the rough days. One of them, Jessica, got married last year to a wonderful man who's actually, legitimately a teacher. We all went to the wedding and cried happy tears because we'd all made it to the other side. We'd all healed enough to believe in love again. As for Marcus Webb or Daniel Morrison, or whatever name he's using in his head, I hope he's miserable in prison. I hope every day he thinks about the lives he destroyed, the trust he violated, the love he weaponized. But honestly, I don't think about him much anymore. He's just a chapter in my story, not the whole book. And the chapters I'm writing now, they're so much better than anything I could have written with him. So there it is, my story of deception, betrayal, and the revenge that came from refusing to stay silent. I spent 3 years believing a lie, but I've spent the years since making sure no one else falls for the same one. If you've made it this far, thank you. Seriously, these stories aren't easy to tell, and they're not always easy to hear, but they're important. Here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever had that moment where something felt off, but you ignored it because you wanted so badly to believe? Have you ever been in a situation where love made you blind to the truth? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your story might help someone else who's struggling with their own situation right now. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and smash that notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for being here, and remember, trusting your gut isn't paranoia, it's survival.